Now, it's time to say a very good morning to Neil Oliver. Neil, you put out a rather prescient tweet last night in which you suggested that, or you asked the question, are all political parties involved in some kind of mass suicide that we don't know anything about? It does seem a bit like that, doesn't it?
It just looks like carnage and chaos, whichever way you look at it. And I think whatever political allegiance you've had in the past, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, SNP, it all looks disastrous. It's like watching. You'd almost be forgiven for thinking it was deliberate.
Yes.
How they can be timing the things they're saying and the decisions they're making at the moment looks like some kind of self-harm. It's beyond me to imagine why they're doing what they're doing and saying what they're saying now.
And this latest statement, which I've got from a tweet in Scotland, Scottish Government confirms international travel and going on holiday will not be illegal from Friday, but travelling to the airport will be. Right? Now, I'm assuming, I don't know if you saw this story the other day, Neil, but we talked about it on the show the other day. This brilliant sort of genius idea that they had in Ireland where a bunch of people worked out that you can go to the airport and drink. So they all bought £9 tickets for Ryanair from Dublin to Gatwick, went to the airport, got to the bar, got stuck in with their boarding cards. And when the time came for the plane to depart, they just said, no, you're all right. We're not going anywhere. We're just staying here. And so presumably this is why they're making it illegal to travel to the airport.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. I think a lot of these, whack-a-mole sort of things that are going on all the time, it all comes from a desire to have control.
Yes.
The whole point, they want to do it without saying it, that they basically want everyone completely trapped at home. I think they would rather we were in our houses for 23 and a half hours a day, but rather than put in place the means to enforce that, which they're fighting shy of at the moment, I can only presume. They're just doing everything they can. And so an illogical sounding statement like that, you can travel, but you can't go to the airport, it just sounds increasingly like people in desperation, making things up as they go along. And I just don't listen to it. Not because I'm not interested. I mean, on the contrary, I'm absolutely fascinated and appalled by the whole exercise. But I simply don't have enough hours in the day to keep up with the minutiae of it. I barely know where I am. I know that in Scotland we're going into Tier 4, or I will be in Tier 4 here in Stirling, which is part of the big Central Belt block. Although it doesn't, I don't think it's going to take in Edinburgh, just to make things even more confusing. And so we can't move unless you've got very good reasons for doing so. Explicitly explain special circumstances that would allow you to move out of your zone. Right. Everything's going to be shut. But I don't keep up with it. I couldn't quote you or argue the toss with you about exactly what you can and can't do. Right.
But would it be likely, for example, Neil, if and when that comes in on Friday, I think it is, will you be accosted by a member of Her Majesty's Constabulary if you're found out and about?
Your guess is as good as mine. I think I had John Swinney, high up in the SNP, yesterday saying that they wouldn't be sort of actively seeking to enforce the rules with the police. But obviously, if a person gets reported, if someone's out and about doing something, visiting a household or moving about, it could be reported. And I presume what they mean is that the police would follow up on those, those reports and alleged infringements of the regulations. But your guess is as good as mine. It's just a constantly moving, shimmering picture.
Yeah. And I mean, we hear Alok Sharma was on with Julie Hartley-Brewer this morning saying, well, the thing is, I'd like to have my parents around for Christmas, but, it may be just too early to say. It's like, they're now thinking that they've got the power to give us permission about whether or not we have a Christmas dinner with our friends and family.
I know. There's clearly a fundamental principle at stake here that about freedom that gets constantly shouted down by what we all plainly understand about the virus. I mean, I have to say on Good Morning Britain this morning, Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid, Piers Morgan was bellowing at the screen about suck it up. That when it came to Christmas and if it had to be done away with, suck it up. And Lorraine Kelly was saying it's only a roast dinner. Suck it up. Yeah. That was the words. That was the choice of words. Yeah. For Piers. Now, I have to say, I mean, I know that's leveling something personal at an individual, but when you're talking about someone high profile, on a 7-figure income, who we know had a great holiday in France, whose job has never been more secure, whose career has never been going better, for someone in that position to use language like "suck it up." Say that to somebody, with dementia in a care home. Suck it up. Say that to somebody who's dying of undiagnosed, untreated cancer, undiagnosed, untreated heart disease. Say that to somebody who's lost their livelihood. Say that to somebody who's lost the business that they've given their life to building up. Suck it up. I find that is a variation on the thinking that takes us to the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
The ends justify the means has been the clarion call of totalitarian regimes since totalitarian regimes were ever attempted, that the ends justify the means. And it's not fair and it's not right. And I think it's shameful to be battering people at this time, when people are on their knees for so many reasons and in so many circumstances, and just to say, suck it up, I find beyond the pale.
It really is extraordinary how some people have taken this sort of pandemic and used it as an opportunity to make a stand in some way, shape or form. And Piers is a friend of mine. I had him in here and we had a good row about his stance versus mine. But you're absolutely right. I mean, because the science, as we keep being told, is not really there. There is no science that tells us that what is going on is going to stop anything. There's no science behind the idea that the lockdown is going to work. I mean, we still haven't heard from the Welsh as to whether or not their lockdown worked. We still haven't heard from Scotland and Nicola Sturgeon as to whether the measures that are being taken and are about to be increased are going to work. We've got no idea whether the measures that we're currently facing in England are working. And so none of that is really being talked about. Instead, what we get is this kind of rather dislocated government talking about the green industrial revolution. And again, talking to people who barely have 2 pennies to rub together. Well, why don't you just get an electric car? I mean, it's ludicrous.
I know, let them eat cake.
Yeah.
You said it. The thing that struck me forcefully was this idea that people would be expected to, in one way or another, I'm sure there was some sort of lip service paid to an incentive scheme, but all the people in the country who have fossil fuel driven cars, diesel or petrol, that they would have to invest in, as you said, I mean, even the cheapest of the electric cars are £30,000 and £40,000.
Right.
That is just simply not going to happen. So what I think the government, without saying it, seem to be working towards is simply a situation where far fewer people drive a car. It's not about transferring like for like. It's not about getting all those petrol, diesel-driven cars replaced with electric cars. Because I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams imagines that the power infrastructure would be there either.
No.
You mentioned it. The necessity for batteries basically to store all this power. And as you said, the cobalt comes from dubious places and dubious regimes, slavery, child slavery.
Yeah.
Even the tin that's the solder on motherboards in all of the things we use, never mind batteries. Tin in many cases is being mined and acquired, in places in the world where it's being done under dreadful conditions and by child slaves. Again, and simply to push this agenda that everything that's powered by wind or sunlight is green is not good enough, because there are consequences for making the equipment and the infrastructure that will be green, maybe when it's all earned out in 25 or a generation's time. But to just try and hoodwink people with the idea that you can just move seamlessly from what we've had to what we're supposed to desire in the future without there being massive consequences is disingenuous and dishonest.
Yes, and that's well before we start to talk about the disposal of things like batteries, which basically do not biodegrade and so will be forever poisoning the earth with whatever leaks out of them when you bury them. And again, we get taught by our masters, as I refer to them ironically, that everybody wants it. And you go, well, what do you mean everybody wants it? I've been asking all morning for someone to ring me up and tell me they voted for this green revolution, right? And what you get from the government is, well, we've done all these surveys and everybody wants cleaner air and everybody wants less pollution. But as I said, nobody's going to say they don't want that if you ask them the question, are they?
And also, all of that, yes. And also, why would you do it now? The country's on its knees. Some people are all right, and some people have been helped. And there have been systems in place to keep some people going, but many people are on their knees or worse. And as far as I'm concerned, what has operated before our eyes is a system of triage, which is to say that, like in the aftermath of a disaster, where the medics decide who they can save and who is just going to have to bleed to death because they're too badly hurt. That's the analogy I would use. There's a section of the population, the self-employed and other people in the private sector, seem to have simply been set aside by triage as not going to be saved.
Yeah.
And all of those people are facing up to that at the moment. And then to somehow throw in this wild card in the midst of it, when we're in the thick of it, and say we're going to have a green revolution and you're all going to be driving around, in magic flying cars by 2030.
Yeah.
Who is that? Who is that supposed to help? Is it simply some misguided attempt to draw attention in another direction and get another slew of headlines that are about something other than COVID? But who bells the cat? I mean, it's political expediency at the moment because it's 10 years away. But as 2030 draws closer, I would have thought any party that was campaigning on a platform of saying we're not going to take away your car is going to do quite well.
Yeah.
I mean, are the people of the Red Wall that miraculously, the Conservative Party somehow won over to their way of thinking at the last election, did they know that coming straight down the line was the news that their cars were going to get taken away? All those little businesses, people that drive around, cleaners, painters, people that have little vehicles, where they're moving about trying to earn an honest coin. Those people in the Red Wall, that the consequence was going to be that all of that was going to get taken away and you were going to have to find some other way of running your business.
Well, exactly. Because I'm told there is a van that you can get which is electric, but it's about 75,000 quid. As opposed to the basic kind of, white van that most people would use to run that particular type of business. And that's the other thing. People are now saying to me in large numbers on this show, we're never voting Tory again. And these are not just the people that voted it in the last election to get away from the European Union. These are people that are lifelong 3, 4, 5 election voting Tories who are saying, that's it, we've had enough. But as your tweet suggested, Neil, the other lot aren't much better, are they?
I'm pretty much a lifelong political cynic. I don't and never have had much faith in the political class. I mean, here in Scotland, I can say I'm 53. Never in my life have I lived a single day in Scotland under a government I actually voted for. I always voted, and I've voted for everybody. Yeah. Trust me, over the years. I've voted Green once. I've voted Labour. I've voted Conservative. I've voted Liberal Democrat. I've been right across the board because I don't really have any faith in any of them. But at the moment, all of those prominent four in British politics to me seem like bursted flushes, spent forces. They don't have a coherent thought in their heads. They're moving from one act of political expediency to another. And in the process, whoever they're listening to, I mean, if you commission a poll, as far as I can make out, polls are like bespoke suits. If you go to a pollster and tell him what you want, that's what he'll stitch together for you.
Well, I was talking to Kevin O'Sullivan about this the other day. Because we've commissioned polls and we were in newspapers and stuff, as I'm sure you have. And the first question the pollster says to you as the commissioner of the poll is, what answer do you want to get?
Exactly. And if all they're doing is sitting listening to the praise, to the bright light of adulation that they are paying for and receiving from pollsters, if that's the way they're making their decisions, then heaven help us all. As I'm sure you are, I'm just out and about. I talk to all sorts of folk. Stirling's it's a very ordinary place. It's got folk of all sorts. And I have conversations with all of them, and all I am hearing from everyone that I speak to is despair.
Yeah. What I find interesting about Scotland at the moment, though, Neil, is that whenever I make anything regarded by SNP supporters as a critique or a criticism of the Scottish government, what they get back is this kind of, this tribal, well, at least our country is being run by somebody that knows what they're doing. And I mean, I'm like you. I have no faith in politicians. My life does not depend on politicians. My worth does not depend on politicians, and my happiness does not depend on them either. And I would no longer and no more support Boris Johnson than I would support Nicola Sturgeon. But what I find weird is that these SNP kind of extremists talk about Nicola Sturgeon as if she's some kind of Boadicea figure who's going to lead them, through the battlefield and get independence for Scotland, and then everything will be fine.
This whole furore that's kicked up in the last few days because Boris Johnson, quote unquote, said that devolution was a disaster. That's just another big paw on another mine that's just exploded. Yeah. Covered himself in whatever he covered in. But the point is, devolution was really the pet of John Smith, the late MP, leader of the Labour Party, died in the mid-90s there, and devolution was a project to which he was committed, and Labour went ahead with it in the Tony Blair years. But it was hubris because the Labour Party at the time had a stranglehold on Scotland. They bestrode Scotland like a one-party state. And believed that they would dominate a devolved Scottish Parliament, and it was and that's not what happened. They've now they're gone. Labour's a spent force in Scotland, and the one-party state in Scotland is the Scottish National Party. But the Scottish National Party has never wanted devolution. It's like handing somebody a dog when what they really want is a cat. They're looking after the dog, but what they really want is the cat. And they've got no stake in a devolved administration delivering for Scotland, because their objective is one thing and one thing only. Old Tam Dalyell, who used to be part of what did they call them? The awkward squad within the Labour Party. He described a devolution, I think, as a motorway with no exits, leading to one destination and one destination only, which is separation. Independence, and how right he was. And now what the SNP have in Holyrood is a state-funded machine for propagandising the single issue that they're interested in. I mean, other people far more, learned in these matters than me can quote all the figures at you. But education, health, all of these things have been so on the downslope under all the years of the SNP. It has not. The Scottish government is not delivering for the Scottish people. The life expectancy in Glasgow, in the East End of Glasgow, which is where the First Minister has her constituency, in the East End of Glasgow, life expectancy for a man is 64.
Dear me.
It means that a man is likely to die before he qualifies for his state pension. Yeah. And it means that life expectancy in the East End of Glasgow is lower than in sub-Saharan East Africa, in Mongolia, in Pakistan. Okay? And it's easier. You're more likely as a poor as a poor English boy to get to university than you are as a poor Scottish boy. I'm a sort of classic case of getting up and out, the mobility that used to be there. I was born in a council house. I went to state school. I got to university in the 80s on a maximum grant. Do you remember then?
I do.
I got to, my education, was paid for by that grant system. But it's now you're less likely now as a poor Scottish boy to get to university than a poor English boy. Now that would have been unthinkable in Scotland up until recent times, but it's now what everybody has to take for granted.
Yeah. Well, ridiculously, I mean, I knew a bit about the sort of the devolution arguments because I was working for the Mirror at the time, and I was put in charge of not just the Welsh paper but also the Scottish paper. And Tony Blair and I had dinner one night, and his whole idea of a devolution was to suppress nationalism. He said that was what was going to work. I mean, he could have been more wrong, could he?
Who was it? It was one of the senior Labour MPs at the time. Said that devolution would kill nationalism stone dead. I think he said that it was Robertson in 1997, something like that. He said that it would kill nationalism stone dead, but that was just a classic miscalculation by Labour, who at that time thought that they would be in power in Scotland until Kingdom Come.
And Wales, yeah.
But the situation changed, under their unsuspecting feet, and now here we are, and. Scotland is now the most governed, the most bureaucratised country in Western Europe, there or thereabouts. But the irony is the Scottish government has no interest in devolving power within Scotland. So you've got this bizarre situation where Orkney and Shetland, for example, the councillors up there are talking seriously about seeking independence from Scotland, because rather than devolve power to the local authorities, it has been the Scottish government's practice to hoard power back at Holyrood. To take power away from local authorities and local councils. They did away with the local police constabularies, and now there's a single police Scotland. That would be an example of that process. So for a party that's about devolution at the moment and talking about listening to the voices of people, they hoard power, and in Scotland, the only the MSPs, they're on 62,000 a year, which there's not many jobs in Scotland that pay that pay that kind of salary, and the big earners, most of the big earners in Scotland now are not entrepreneurs. They're not people in private enterprise generating real wealth and going out there and taking the risks and earning the real money. The only big incomes really are in the public sector, people that are on taxpayer funded salaries. And there's now a culture, a dependency culture within Scotland, where the civil service, the public services, the voluntary sector, senior academics, even celebrities, even figures in the arts and all the rest of it, they know that they depend on the largesse and the patronage of the dominant power in Scotland, which is the SNP. And so increasingly, all of those sectors sing the SNP song. They sing the song of independence because they depend on the patronage of the government for their grants and for their incomes and for their jobs.
So much for independence. Neil, we could do this all day, but unfortunately we're out of time. But listen, thank you so much. That's given us an awful lot of food for thought. I think we'll pick up on it again same time next week. Neil Oliver there on the problem with Scotland, the problem with the SNP. Don't believe those people who say that it's all going to be great. Independence is the answer, because it isn't.